I guess that was, is that Tourist B? Look, there's another one there. Look at, what the fuck is that? Yo, I think we're seeing some aliens.
For the last 6 to 9 months, something very strange has been happening in the skies over Manitoba. And it seems that this is not the first time this particular region has been a hotbed for UFO activity. Indeed, it dates back all the way to 1967, where one of the most famous and well-supported UFO incidents on record occurred. An incident that left physical evidence on the witness in question, evidence that ultimately led to his death. Good afternoon and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin, coming to you again from Shetland, covering this amazing event happening here. The first ever vertical launch, commercial vertical launch that is, from Western Europe. And I have lots of amazing footage of what's going down here at Saxavord. If you want to see the latest, make sure to tune in to a video that I'm going to have linked at the end of this one. In the meantime, I would like to thank the following incredible people. Just need to keep doing this because these people made all of this possible. Nevada Hamaker, Radoslav Benda, Aaron Archer, Julian Einwig, Richard Halverson, M.E.A. Davidson, Garnet Good, Ilana Watson, Tim Bingham, Luther Luckett, Rui Barata, and North State Brokers. I still have more to recognize, and I'll keep these coming for as long as you guys keep contributing. Thank you so much for your help. And if you'd like to contribute to my ongoing coverage of these sorts of events, well, all the details are in the description, but let's get on to the UFO content. On May the 14th, 2024, a Canadian couple saw 4 UFOs glowing as bright as the sun, according to them, above a river close to Fort Alexander. Now, Fort Alexander is a remote region of Manitoba. This is not the kind of area where one might expect to see a lot of military activity. Yes, there is a military base down in Winnipeg, an Air Force base to be precise, but this particular region is actually Native American land. And if these are military flares being parachuted over this region, you would think that someone would have to have gotten permission from the local tribal councils in order to do this sort of thing, or if it was some sort of search and rescue operation making use of parachute flares, somebody would have announced it, or somebody would have reported that this is what had happened and not left it such a big mystery. I can't imagine that this is some sort of top secret government operation utilizing parachute flares. However, some people with alleged experience with the military have claimed that this is the sort of pattern one could expect with parachute flares, dropping them in pairs like this during a search and rescue operation or some sort of training exercise. So at first, I was nearly convinced that this might be a rational explanation for what these people saw, even though they certainly claim that whatever they saw was otherworldly and they can't imagine that it was anything that humans could have produced. Apparently, the 2 people involved were UFO skeptics until they actually saw this, and their final statement on the matter was, quote, "The naysayers can have their opinion, but I disagree." But before you also become a naysayer, I might recommend that you have a look at this UFO that also appeared over Manitoba, Lake Winnipeg to be precise, and there's no way in hell that this is a military flare. Now, first of all, have a look at a side-by-side comparison of the objects in question. The color is almost identical. And how do I know that this also isn't a military flare? Well, because it's sitting right in the middle of a flight corridor for commercial aircraft, because it was a commercial airliner that photographed the damn thing. And as you can see also from this close-up, That doesn't look like a flare to me at all. And even though the quality of the original video is not good enough to pick up the kinds of smoke contrails left behind by military flares, these photographs taken by the airline pilot are definitely good enough to see things like that, and there's no evidence of the kinds of smoke contrails that go hand in hand with military flares. So given the similarity of these objects, and given the fact that they both appeared over a similar region of Canada, both in the Lake Winnipeg area, that's just too big of a coincidence to be imagined. As a matter of fact, these airline pilot photographs took place before this whole incident took place with the people at Fort Alexander. And incidentally, these recent incidents are not the only example of things that have been happening in the Manitoba region associated with UFOs. These sorts of videos have been cropping up everywhere recently. But lest you think this outbreak is a recent manifestation of UFOs and something that's only cropped up since things got very intense with UFOs in the news, with David Grush's reports, etc., well, this region has a long history with UFO incidents, beginning on May 20th, 1967, with the infamous Falcon Lake incident, one of the most well-documented and well-supported UFO cases in history. Well-supported because it's what's called a close encounter of the second kind, a UFO that left physical evidence of its presence. Now, by interesting coincidence, or perhaps it isn't that much of a coincidence, Falcon Lake actually lies only about 120 kilometers southeast of where this Fort Alexander sighting took place, which is marked by the white X at the top of your screen. Now, the witness to this incident is the type of witness that I generally don't cover on this channel. He is an industrial mechanic named Stefan Michalak, or rather it was an industrial mechanic, who allegedly had a bit of a drinking problem. The kind of guy that nobody is ever going to believe, but in this particular case, the UFO left physical evidence on his body. And this is something that was recounted by his son, Stan Michalak, in 2017. I'm going to be quoting extensively from a CBC news report that describes his experience of when his father came home from this frightening incident on this long May weekend of 1967. It was something that put his family life into upheaval and remains one of the world's best known UFO encounters. Quote, "I recalled seeing him in bed. He didn't look good at all. He looked pale and haggard." And Michalak, by the way, was 9 years old at the time and was allowed to see his dad for a couple of minutes on the day after what soon came to be known as the Falcon Lake incident. Then there was the smell. When I walked into his bedroom, there was a huge stink in the room, like a real horrible aroma of sulfur and burnt motor. It was all around and it was coming out of his pores. It was bad. I was very afraid. My dad had been injured and I didn't know anything about it. But within a couple of days, not only did he know more, so did most of the public. Now, Stefan Michalak was not just a mechanic, he was also an amateur geologist who liked to venture into the wilderness around Falcon Lake to prospect for quartz and silver. He had staked some claims in the prior year and set out on this long weekend to explore some more. And on May 20th of 1967, Stefan was near a vein of quartz along the Precambrian shield in the area when the 51-year-old was startled by a gaggle of nearby geese that erupted into a clattering of honks. According to his accounts, as reported in the newspapers at the time and since repeated in books, magazines, and TV shows, Stefan looked up and saw two cigar-shaped objects with a reddish glow hovering about 45 meters away. One descended, according to Stefan's account, landing on a flat section of rock and taking on more of a disc shape in the process. The other remained in the air for a few minutes before flying off. Believing it to be a secret U.S. military experimental craft, Stefan sat back and sketched it over the next half hour. Then he decided to approach. later recalling the warm air and the smell of sulfur as he got closer, as well as a whirring sound of motors and the hissing of air. He also noticed a door open on the side with bright lights inside, and he said he heard voices muffled by the sound of the craft. He said he called out, offering mechanical help to the Yankee boys if they needed it. Their voices went silent and did not answer, so Stefan tried in his native Polish, and then in Russian, then finally in German. Only the whir and the hiss of the craft responded, and he claims he went closer and noted the smooth metal of the ship with no seams. Then he looked into the bright doorway, putting on his welding goggles he used to protect his eyes while chipping at rocks during prospecting. Inside, Stefan said he saw light beams and panels of various colored flashing lights but could not see anyone or any living thing. When he stepped away, 3 panels slid across the door opening and sealed it. He reached to touch the craft, which he said melted the fingertips of the welding gloves he was wearing. The craft then began to turn counterclockwise, and Stefan says he noticed a panel that contained a grid of holes. Shortly afterward, he was struck in the chest by a blast of hot air or gas that pushed him backward and set his shirt and cap ablaze. He ripped away the burning garments as the craft lifted off and flew away. Disoriented and nauseous, Stefan stumbled through the forest and vomited. He eventually made his way back to his motel room in Falcon Lake and then caught a bus back to Winnipeg. He was treated at a hospital for burns to his chest and stomach that later turned into raised sores on a grid-like pattern, and for weeks afterward, he suffered from diarrhea, headaches, blackouts, and weight loss. Now, once the story was out, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police that is, the Air Force, the media, and various government agencies and hordes of gawking members of the public descended on the Michalak Small River Heights bungalow in Winnipeg. "It just flipped our lives over," said Stan Michalak. "It took several years before it finally died down." After that, and until the day he died in 1999, Stefan believed he should never have said a thing, but at the time, he felt it was a duty. He wanted others, if they were to see the same thing, to avoid it and not get hurt. In Poland, before Stefan moved his family to Canada, he was a military policeman with a set of moral guidelines that he lived by. That is, if something happened, it should be reported. In addition to constant probing from authorities, the family endured condemnation and criticism from the public. Stefan's sanity was questioned, and Michalak was bullied in school. Though he wished he hadn't said anything, Stefan never backed away from the story either. He also never claimed to have seen aliens, and still considered it to be a secret military craft to the day he died. Quote, "If you asked him what it was he saw, he could describe it in intimate detail, but he would never say, oh, it was definitely extraterrestrials, because there was no evidence to prove that, according to his son. He might ask, what do you think I saw? But right up until he died, his story never changed one iota, nothing about it or how he told it. In all those years since, and with some 300 pages of documentation on the encounter, there's nothing so far that has flawed his story." Now, after the incident, Michalak continued to suffer from prolonged bouts of diarrhea, headaches, blackouts, and continued weight loss. He eventually sought help from the Mayo Clinic. In the Mayo Clinic's report, it was determined that Michalak was of sound mind, and his physical condition following the event was allegedly consistent with radiation poisoning. However, it's important to note that tests administered at Pinawa, Manitoba following the incident came up negative. Michalak lost over 6 kilograms following the incident, with his lymphocyte count drastically falling to near lethal levels. He continued to suffer from intermittent reappearances of the burns, and its effects would never fully subside until he finally died. Now, as the government became increasingly involved, they intensified the search with helicopters combing the area. Aiding in the investigation were various agencies, including the Department of Health, Department of National Defense, joined with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Royal Canadian Air Force in the search. And there were also American teams there as well. Now, interestingly enough, analysis of the site yielded a 4.5 meter circle of burned vegetation vegetation in the site that Michalak claimed that the landing occurred, and the presence of highly radioactive elements within the soil samples and clothing Michalak had removed. Metal that was superheated was found to have melted into the cracks of rocks and exhibited high levels of radioactivity. Now, skeptics claim that Michalak had an alcohol problem and hallucinated the whole thing, and the burns were the result of an accident stemming from his alcohol use, and that he made this claim in order to hide their cause. Seems to me that that's the most bizarre claim that anyone could possibly make, to hide the results of an alcohol-related accident, but okay. In addition to that, they claim that he made this UFO claim in order to keep people away from his geology claim in this particular region, which also seems beyond idiotic. Making a UFO claim would be about the stupidest way to try to dissuade people from going to your geology claim sites. I mean, all that's going to do is attract crowds of people, which after all it did, and it continues to do to this day, by the way. So it just seems to me that trying to debunk this case by attacking this man's character, that just doesn't seem logical to me. There are too many factors involved in this case to simply write this off to alcoholism connected to some bizarre claim. Oh yeah, and the radioactive elements, well, skeptics claim that those were planted there by UFO enthusiasts after the event took place, because after all, Michalak himself could not have done that because he was still very ill at the time and unable to travel by the time investigators swarmed over the area. So what's my analysis of this incident, and does it have anything to do with the sightings that have been swarming around the Manitoba area recently? Well, all I have to say is this. If you happen to spot something on the ground, something that was previously in the air and glowing red, you might want to just take photographs and not approach it, and certainly not touch it. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe. Also, please consider supporting this channel. There are ways to do that in the description, as I said before. And as always, stay angry about space.